Okay, everyone. Let's continue with modifying our application to be more mobile responsive. So the next thing I want to update is our header component. So our header right now is not optimized for the mobile view. So inside of our header styles, I'm just going to modify the actual width and height to be a little bit more aligned with the actual browser view inside of a mobile device. Now, inside of this header container, we are going to just paste in that same media query that we had before. Because we're using the same media query in any of our mobile style changes. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it so that what I want to set in terms of the actual header container is I want to shrink the height to 60 pixels instead of 70 pixels. Just literally shaving off 10 pixels here. I want to make sure that there's some padding all around the header of 10 pixels. And then I'm going to have a margin bottom of 20 pixels so that we push the content down with our new header. So with that, we need to now modify the actual size of the components inside of the header, but the header is shaped more like how I want it to be. Now, inside of the actual logo container, I am going to add in this media query again. And what I want to change is I want the width of this logo to be way smaller. So I only want it to be 50 pixels. And then I don't want any padding anymore. I just want a padding of 0. So now if we go back and we see that our logo is more aligned with where we want it to be inside of this header now. I also want to make sure that the options container, so that section containing the option links we have that navigate us to different web pages, I want to make sure that that is now taking up more of the space of the header than before. Before, it only took up 50% of the total width of the header because we had so much real estate space with a web view. Instead, I'm going to do a width of 80% because the only other thing on this browser page when we're in this mobile view, or in any view in fact, is just the logo. So now with this width set this way, we have way more space as we can see. In fact, everything still works, which is really great for us. We just need to make sure to update our views, like our home page, to also be responsive. Now, what it is that I want to change is I want the menu item to fit in a nicer way. So what we can do is go into our menu item styles and modify them so that they have a similar media query and then render a different shape on the actual menu item container. So as you remember, we set the height based on this size property, which does dictate to it how big it should be based on which image it is. Because when you remember inside of our web view, the men and women sections are larger than the 3 other sections that we have. Now, what we want to do here is we want to actually modify this height value so that it stays pretty consistent regardless of size. So what we can do is at the end, append our media screen query. And what we'll just say is simply height 200 pixels. Now, media queries have a higher specificity than anything else inside of our styles. So no matter what styles inside of this here, the media query, if it has the same style, will always overwrite the styles here because media queries always have a higher specificity order than regular selectors. So now if we go back, we'll see that our elements are aligned much better because the heights are statically 200 pixels and the widths will always adjust. So the screen will try and fit these elements on the page in the right order that they have access to. And then the moment that a new one starts on a new page, it fills the remaining space, but the height is always set to a specific static 200 pixels. So with that, we now have a mobile view. Now, our home page is set up. The next thing that we need to modify is our shop page. Our shop page is going to be a little bit more complicated because our shop page, it doesn't look terrible. We have these elements, but the problem with this is that this item, you have to actually click it in order to see the add to cart, which you then have to click. Instead, with a mobile view, this button seems too small in order to just put here. The style and the actual design needs it to be a little bit more deliberate in how we can actually add items, because we want our users to be able to add items as easily as possible. So what we're going to modify is both the collection preview as well as our actual collection item. So let's go back to our application code. And what we need to do is go to the collection item styles. Now I do think actually I have a slight typo in our collection item. Here I accidentally put collection styles.styles.jsx. This should actually be collection item.styles.jsx. So if we make that modification, we also have to make sure that we update it here. Now mine automatically updated it for me because my VS Code is intelligent like that. If yours is not, you just got to make sure to modify the place where you imported all of these style components in so that it's pointing to the right route. Just a little typo, right? These things happen to everybody. So inside of our collection item styles, what we're going to do is we are going to go into this collection item container and we are going to modify how large this width will be based on the actual mobile view. So inside of here, I want the width to be 40 view width, meaning that it takes up 40% of the total width of the full view. Then I need to overwrite some of these hover features because these hover features I don't want inside of my mobile view. With our mobile view, I don't care about the hover. You don't actually hover that much with touch as you're used to with the mobile. So what I'm going to say is that the image, just unset the opacity. Unset pretty much says that this was never set in the first place. So there's actually no image styles here on the hover effect of the image when you're inside of this media size. For any buttons in here, I also want to unset the opacity as well. So now, if we go back to our application, we'll see that we're looking at the wrong file. This is probably because we didn't save this file. So once my VS Code actually updated this route, it didn't actually manually save the file for me, so I had to manually make that save. And now here we'll see this looks a little bit more tightly coupled because the width is larger. The only reason it's still stacking like this is because we need to update our actual collection preview view. So what we'll do here is we will go to our collections preview, styles, and inside of the preview container, we need to write our media query. So let's copy back our old media query here. And inside, we are going to say that I want this now to have a align items property. So this allows us to have everything centered whenever our content is inside of this display flex. Now, I know that this is a lot of CSS that we haven't touched upon before. If you're unfamiliar with CSS, this might be completely new to you. Honestly, this CSS is pretty extensive in terms of what rules there are. I'm going to link the Flexbox ruling documentation for you. It's actually an amazing resource to read through because it's really a matter of where the more you practice with, the more that you'll see. It's really comprehensive and it's difficult for me to cover inside of a course on React because I'll have to spend so much time on actual CSS things. So if this gets confusing for you at any point, I will definitely include a version of our application where everything is converted to be mobile friendly for you. Otherwise, you can pause the video and read up on some of these styling rules if my explanations are not fully clear and you don't have the full context of everything. But it's really just a matter of doing this CSS on your own with practice, right? So one of the other things that we have to do after we did this align items is we need to modify our preview container as well. so that instead of being a display flex, what it will be is a display grid. Now, this is a new CSS feature that I will also link the documentation for, and this is another version of display flex. We've actually used display grid before inside of our application, and it literally just lets us place elements inside of whatever this top level component is in a grid-like shape. So here I'm going to say grid template is always going to just have columns where it's 1FR, 1FR. If you remember from that lesson on CSS grids really quickly, 1FR just means whatever space is remaining inside of this screen, meaning that there will always be essentially columns, and the two columns here will each take up one full portion of the application, which means that they're equally 50% of what space is available inside of this preview container. And then I also want a grid gap of 15 pixels. So grid gap is pretty much just the spacing between these elements. So with this now, we see that our application looks more like that grid I was telling you about, right? There's always two columns, and they always take up 1FR of space. They're also 40 view width in size, and there's a 15 pixel gap in between all of these items. So now our application looks way closer to what we need it to be. Now, the only thing missing is our actual button. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our collection item styles, and we're going to modify the button itself so that the button is always displayed whenever we're in a mobile view. We're going to say that the display is block instead of display none. So block is the default. You can do block or inline block. We're going to make sure that the opacity is 0.9. We're also going to set a min width value where we unset it. The reason why we have to unset it, even though it's not here, is because the button leverages custom button. And custom button is a custom button container with a min width of 165 pixel. But that's too big for mobile view. That's pretty much half our screen. So we just want to unset it. And we also want to modify the padding so that what it'll do is it'll set a top value of 0, 10 pixels on the right, 0 on the bottom, and then 10 pixels on the left. So this way we're getting 0, 10 pixels, 0, 10 pixels. In fact, you don't even need this. This syntax is also the same way. If you just put two values for padding, it's saying 0 for top, bottom, 10 pixels left, right. And now if we save this, we'll actually see that our button is always present. If we click this, we'll see that it still works. Our items are being added to our checkout. Our collection preview is pretty close to what we actually want it to look like. Now, at this point, I definitely encourage you to take a crack at trying to modify the styles for the rest of this yourself. It's a good exercise to maybe work on some CSS that we haven't really touched upon too much of in this course because this is a React course. Once you've played around with the styles, you can always check back to the GitHub for what it is that we have done. Now, I will also include a GitHub link of everything we've done up until this point right now, so you have something to reference against. But just like with all the other exercises that we did, this is a great chance to take some time of your own to play around with some styling. So good luck with that, and always refer to the completed version and see how your styles match up to mine. Again, mine is just my own attempt at the solution. Right? It's totally up to you how you want your application to look in a mobile view. So with that, good luck with the exercise, and I'll see you in the next lesson.